Hello everyone, good morning and welcome to my first attempt at a vlog. It's very unnerving staring at this camera and knowing that you're all going to be looking back at me, but I'm just going to talk today very briefly about a book by Elizabeth Gaskell. I got one from the book depository, lovely thing, just a moment. Take this off. Cranford and Other Stories. So I'm going to talk firstly about Cranford and then about a few of the other stories. Cranford's a lovely book. It's not one of your typical Jane Austen type love affairs with young women, although there are marriages and stuff. But it's very short, about 170 pages, and it consists of a group of stories which then became a novel. And it's centred on Miss Mattie Jenkins, who is an old spinster, and it's told by Miss Mary Smith. And this detached narrator is quite a common feature in these stories. And it's a lovely book. Each story is told very wittily. It's one of those typical things that you just love to read. There have been BBC adaptations, I'm sure. I'm pretty sure there are. I haven't seen them, but I think, who was it? Maybe Judi Dench may have played a character in it, which tells you all you need to know. One book it reminded me of was The Warden by Anthony Trollope. Not so much in the events that happen, but in the sense that the central character, Mattie Jenkins, is such a good, pure person who seems a bit naive and a bit simple, and people take advantage of her. But in fact, everyone around her is affected by her goodness and modifies their behaviour. And it's very similar to Septimus Harding, the Warden, in that novel. So that kind of brought up some parallels. One thing probably I would like to say about it is about serialization, because this is something that most people would know who read Victorian literature on a regular basis, that a lot of novels were first serialized in magazines, and it's hard to believe today in our era of instant gratification. You want to download it, you want to download it now, and you start cursing because your Kindle's not downloading fast enough. But this was sent out in monthly or sometimes weekly parts. If you lived in the country, you'd probably be waiting even longer to get your your latest magazine. If you were a middle class spinster, you might be waiting until somebody else had finished with it first. So it's amazing how people used to actually read these things. But Cranford is a lovely book. I recommend it to anybody. The short stories then, well, say short stories, it's not really short stories, it's shorter fiction. There are 6 and they take about 400 pages, so you can see that they're not exactly brief tales. The first one's called Mr. Harrison's Confessions, and that's very similar to Cranford. It's narrated again by, there's a third-party narrator. This time it's a man. It's a bit shorter and it's a kind of prototype for Cranford, and it's similar in the sense that, as in Cranford, the characters are mainly women. And so this idea of a town dominated by the middle class of the town dominated by women, and that causes some problems. And it's a bit of a farce really, because he kind of falls into all these marriage proposals without really knowing how. But there's a serious side to it, because I've just been reading Anthony Trollope's He Knew He Was Right, which I'm going to review for the Trollope Classic Circuit later this week. And in the introduction to that book, I read that this idea of the predatory Victorian woman and the mother trying desperately to find a husband for her daughter, it actually had a very serious side, because according to the writer of the introduction, 30% of Victorian women in England ended up unmarried as old spinsters, simply because there weren't enough husbands to go around. So that's a bit more of a sobering thought. Some of the other stories are also very interesting. Lois the Witch is a good one. That's about 80 pages, and that's about the Salem witch trials. A young girl who's left an orphan goes over to live with her family in New England, and unfortunately she falls victim to the hysteria in Salem. And it's very interesting the way that Gaskell, we know what's going to happen. Let's face it, we all know that she's going to be accused of being a witch. But Gaskell makes it very clear why, and the background, and she builds it up very nicely. The idea of a jealous younger cousin who's going to try and get attention the older cousin who thinks that she's being interfered with her love affairs, the other cousin who wants to marry her and who's mad, and just the general suspicion towards this newcomer in the town. And so by the time it happens, it's actually very obvious and it's a natural resolution. It's horrible. I think whenever I read about Salem witch trials, I just think, oh my god, how could that happen? But yeah, it's a very touching story. One other one I'd like to talk about is Cousin Phyllis, and that again is about 80-90 pages, and that's a very pastoral tale. It reminds me a little bit of something like Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy, and a young man goes to work and discovers he has second cousins in the neighbourhood, and he becomes very close to them. And he's another one of these narrators who's not directly involved in the story, and his cousin Phyllis, a beautiful, well-educated vicar's daughter, falls in love with a man and who never really declares his love, and then moves away and gets married. And apart from that, not a lot happens, but it's a very interesting progression of events, and it just describes the difference in how things were then, how things are now, the difference between how quickly courtship progresses, communication. At the time they were just starting to build railways, everything's done by letter, and I think that's why I love reading Victorian literature, because of getting to know what life was like back then, the things that we take for granted now that you just couldn't back then. So anyway, very good. Of course, as always with the classics, I've got my Wordsworth Classics edition, because they only cost a couple of $3 or something if you buy them at the book repository. The only criticism I'll put on this book, well, there's a couple of short stories which I wasn't so keen on, but probably one of the good points about Wordsworth Classics is they give good introductions, and they're very interesting. They bring up points which perhaps you hadn't thought of, and with this one, I find that's not the case. I find the introduction was very much just a summary of what happened, and I was like, oh, there's no point reading that. But overall, very good. So I've actually just ordered a copy of North and South, so another Gaskell book, and hopefully I'll get back to that another time. So thank you for today. That's my first vlog. Now, what you may have been looking at, as well as looking at me, is behind me, my bookshelf. So just get out of the way. This is my study. This is where all my books live, and I'm not going to take the camera closer because it's a bit difficult. But on the top left, which you can't really see, I'll just put that over. There's my Japanese, in the top left of the left-hand bookcase, that top shelf, the two parts there, completely Japanese. The middle bookcase, the first 2.5 rows, mainly classics, English language classics. I'm a bit anal like that. I've got everything sorted out, and as you can also see, there's not a lot of space there. So when my latest round of books come from the book depository, I think that I'm going to have to do a bit of tidying up. That's the problem with having too many books. Okay, thanks a lot, and I'll probably never do this again.